Hello, everybody. Welcome to CripChat, your weekly podcast for everything disability. Today, I'm Jonathan Shar, Ibby Dee,
Hello.
of David Dee. Today, we have a special guest, Mark Pietsch, who is the director of PDA, which is Physical Disabilities Australia, and he's also the founder of Ability.
Hey guys, thanks for having me on today.
And how are you today, Mark Pietsch?
Oh, I'm not too bad. It's a lovely Friday afternoon. We've survived the week and the chaos that's come with it, and we'll see what has to come.
So,
Yeah,
what
true.
we're going to be talking about today is the changes to the NDIS and how it's going to affect us
Yeah,
as people
no,
with NDIS and our
well,
cares.
look, there's been quite a lot of change in
Yeah.
the rules, but largely things will stay mostly the same. But there's just a
Okay.
little bit of extra complexity for us to go through. But I'm glad to go through with that today with you guys and see what we can work out together.
Just please like and share. If you got any questions, put it down in the comment box. Sorry to cut you out. Ibby, on to you. If you got any questions, please. So I was going to ask you, Mark Pietsch.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a disability yourself?
I do. So I've got a musculoskeletal movement disorder. So I'm not the greatest with stairs, put it that way. And I'm also a person with autism and ADHD.
Okay.
Thank you very much for that, David, and thank you very much for that, Mark. I'm sorry. Welcome everyone, and welcome to CripChat. Today we'll be talking about in the eyes of all this choice or control. So yeah, as David asked, and and to build on that, Mark, welcome. Briefly introduce yourself, and also you work with the NDIS. So for next and why this is a crucial topic for people with disability.
So I'm well, hey guys, I'm Mark. I've been in the community services space for about 12 or so years, and my background's intergovernmental relations. So it's mostly working with different government departments that don't often want to work together. I'm a bit of a systemic disability advocate, so it's working on some of the things behind the scenes where like we can tend to fall through the cracks. I'm sort of a bit of a test case myself, being I generally tend to say if I'm involved in a system and there's a problem, I'll tend to find it or experience it myself. And that drove my passion to sort of help others to avoid some of the experiences that I've had. I'm a little bit of a nerd, I have to admit, when it comes to sort of legislation and policy. So you'll have to forgive me if I start to bore you guys to death a little bit talking about legislation, but I promise to try and keep it interesting.
So you're more on the legal side.
I'm not a lawyer, but I like to look at how legislation or the government's laws come into effect and operationalized by government departments. So how we take the written word of the law and make it practical and how that affects our lives.
Okay.
Interesting. Mark, so just to briefly explain, what exactly are these new supporters and why are they being introduced?
Mm-hmm. So through the NDIS review, it was sort of identified that a lot of people were having difficulty sort of navigating the NDIS and understanding how they could use their funding. The government's response to that was to try to make amendments to the NDIS Act to try to enact some of the changes that were proposed by the NDIS review, though largely a lot of the focus has been on cost cutting more so than making things simpler for us. Previously, under the old Act, things were what they call principles based, so it's more based on our interpretation of things. Whereas this new list, it's supposedly clearer by making it firm on what we can and can't have. But there's still a lot of grey area that we have to work out in terms of how it'll affect us in our day-to-day lives.
So it's making it more clearer that you can. It's more defined what we can spend it on.
Yeah. So, like, the problem is, though, even though we've got a list of things that we can and can't use the supports on, it's still very subjective as to whether those things relate to our disability or not.
Yeah.
The biggest risk that comes with these new changes, though, is there's greater, I suppose, consequences if people misuse their funding, in terms of there's new powers that the government has to impose debts or fines, so to speak, on participants and providers if funding's not used exactly correctly, and there's not a great amount of power to appeal those debts or fines. So there's a lot of concern and caution from the community over these changes, understandably, because, like you say, if you spend your funding and you think everything's fine, and maybe the people providing the supports think it's fine, and then, say, a few years down the track, someone from the NDIS decides to go and review that spending, they may choose to issue a debt. But we've received assurances from Rebecca Falkingham, the current CEO, that they're taking an education approach, so that if you make a mistake or two here and there, you'll get a few warnings before they issue a fine. But they may impose other penalties, like taking away self-management or the like. But if, say, you do have a fine issued, or not a fine, sorry, a debt, there's still provisions within the Act. If you make the mistake because of, say, your disability or the like, they can still choose to waive it. But if you don't like the decision that's been made by the NDIS, unfortunately, with the way they've written this legislation, we can't then take that outside of the NDIS to the AAT or through to the courts to go and say that we don't believe that that debt should exist, which some legal scholars have stated that that may be a breach of Australia's constitution, which enables us to have oversight of the courts over government decisions. So there's a lot happening there.
So can you give us an example?
So, like, with these new lists, it's focused mostly on us being able to use our funding on our impairments that have met access to the NDIS, so to speak. So over the coming year or so, the government's committed to issuing what they call an impairment list. So it's a list of what they've deemed that we've met access for in terms of the parts of the body or the things that we're unable to do due to our disability. And whenever we're accessing supports, we have to relate those supports through to those impairments. So, like, say, if I've got a physical disability, like myself,
Yeah.
I have to relate that support through to that physical disability. But if, say, I didn't have a physical disability and I may have a sensory disability, and that sensory disability didn't affect my ability to do something, say, physical, and say I was, I don't know, like, say I'd had a person assist with transport and I had a hearing impairment, for instance, and the NDIS says that your ability to drive isn't in fact affected by like your disability, that support doesn't relate through to your disability. They could then say, we want you to pay the money back associated with that support.
Okay.
So it's a challenge in some respects, though, because say if you have a physical disability and you have an accident because of your physical disability and say break a leg, and that means that you may need extra support or extra support work hours, they're still able to say that that's a health condition and not related through to your disability, and they can refuse to fund the extra support related through to the injury, which just
That's not
doesn't really
fair.
make sense. Exactly. Or we're already starting to see.
But then can you get COPA,
Well, we'd hope so, wouldn't you? But
which would
unfortunately,
pay,
releasing
which would pay for your
well, unfortunately, releasing these lists before the state governments have approved, like to provide supports outside of the NDIS, we're left in some of these gaps where we still have needs that are protected under the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with a Disability, but they're not actually catered for outside of the NDIS.
yeah.
And it means, unfortunately, we're the ones that are stuck in a difficult position trying to have our needs met.
Exactly.
I could.
We have a question
Hey, Mark.
Okay, thank you, David. David John, yes, a question from Margie.
Mhm.
So, will people with disability have a debt raised against them, but cannot afford to repay NDIS, be incarcerated without having access to the justice system?
So it's a difficult question to sort of answer because we haven't had any practical examples at this point. We've been told that that they won't have the same enforcement approach that they took with robo debt, and that there's a 12-month grace period for the disability community to get used to the new way of doing things, as they've sort of put it. They're likely to allow payment plans and the like, though they haven't clearly explained the penalties of not paying that debt. But essentially, if you've got a debt raised against you, you can't appeal that debt, which is very concerning.
Yeah.
Oh.
We need to be
Like,
able to fight it
we
if
can
we can.
we can ask the CEO to waive the debt, and there's certain provisions that they've allowed you to sort of waive the debt. So, say someone's experiencing abuse or neglect at, say, the hands of a service provider or the like, or if that person's disabilities, part of the reason for the debt being raised, it can be waived, but the fact that there's no external oversight in regards to like the agency's decision to raise the debt in the first place, I worry a little bit in regards to the possibility of repeating some of the mistakes that we saw with Robodebt. And especially at the moment where we're in a period where the states haven't committed to delivering supports outside of the NDIS, there's crisis situations that arise that those supports that we desperately need to stay alive in some instances have been sort of placed on the no list by the NDIS, but we also know those supports or services may be the responsibility of the state governments, but they're not practically being met by the state governments. So it's a choice. Do we get a debt raised against us, or do we experience long-term consequences or possibly even death in some instances as to like addressing them? Like I can raise an example just from yesterday of someone that is already in a difficult situation as a result of these changes. It's a gentleman that lives with, say, with a lower limb amputation. He's a below knee amputee, and he was experiencing complications associated with his bipolar disorder, and ended up having a episode that ended up with him flooding his apartment. He was unfortunately, to try and resolve his mental health crisis, he was taken through to hospital to seek treatment. His unit had been completely it was in an uninhabitable situation, which meant that his tenancy was revoked, which made him homeless at that point in time. Homelessness isn't addressed under the new list. It never really has officially by the NDIS, and there's already a lot of difficulties for people with a disability to access crisis accommodation in New South Wales. And this gentleman, because he'd used drugs as to try and address his mental health crisis due to not being able to access a psychiatrist through community mental health, he'd ended up in hospital. And whilst he was in hospital, after the side effects of the drugs had worn off, the hospital had discharged him into homelessness. And then we were sort of left trying to help him to navigate that situation and to fill the gaps where the NDIS isn't able to in that instance, and to try to get the states to help out. But unfortunately, there's not a lot of answers in that situation. But we can see in that instance, we've got involvement from community mental health, which is a state responsibility. We've also got a responsibility with community drug and alcohol services and like homelessness services, which are all state-based systems. But because this person had a significant disability, those state-based services weren't particularly set up to assist in his particular needs. And it's often people that have profound disability needs that are forgotten sometimes in some of these mainstream systems and services. And there's not a lot of recourse for us when the system isn't quite set up to handle some of the complexities that can come with having a disability and the unforeseen consequences associated with that. But when we're like looking at these lists, a lot of the intended, I suppose, impact that the government's hoping to see is a reduction in costs associated with the NDIS, because essentially they're hoping to see the growth of the NDIS capped at $8 billion a year, and they can only achieve that by either reducing the number of participants or reducing the amount that we spend out of our plan.
Yeah.
And if they're making it a little bit more prescriptive in terms of the services we can access, it
Yeah.
can.
But the services, is there a price list for them? And have they changed the price list?
So they've released a new version of the price guide. A lot of the price guide items stay the same, but how we can use them has changed a little bit,
Yeah.
in that we have to make sure that when we're using those services, that they're directly related through to our impairment that we've met access to the NDIS for. So previously, it wasn't really made clear to us, and we could use NDIS supports that helped us to achieve our goals, and we could take a whole of person approach to accessing supports. But now we have to relate it through to our impairments we've
disability.
had access to. So, like, say if you've got a vision impairment and a hearing impairment, and the NDIS only has your vision impairment on file, you can't claim any services associated with hearing impairment, even though you've got it. You have to put in a new access request to have that understood by the NDIS.
Yeah, like, gotta make sure everything is listed.
Yeah, so it's a lot tighter in terms of how and when we can use supports.
Yeah.
One big change that everyone's looking for clarity on is in regards to short-term accommodation. They've highlighted that short-term accommodation in the future, it sits under the supported independent living budget, which the government mandated is only to be delivered by a registered provider after they finalise the registration process with the state governments later in the year. But this new list, it places things like holidays on the no list, and there's a lot of other things that people have incorporated into short-term accommodation flexibly, like activities that may have taken place through the day, like tickets and entry fees and the like. They're clearly on the no list now, as well as hotel or accommodation. So people are asking, does this mean that we're only able to access respite in like group facilities or group homes, essentially?
Yep. Yes, yeah, interesting. Thank you for that, Mark. So many people in the community have voiced concerns about the potential of these support lists to limit choice and control.
Yeah.
So can you share your perspectives on why these concerns exist?
Well, I think a lot of it comes down to the way this list is structured. So all through the consultations, we'd heard that they're creating a replacement rule, or an ability for us to say if something was on the no list, or it may have not have been on like the yes list, we could ask the NDIS to have that substituted and allowed for us if it met our circumstances and it reduced our support needs or costs. And now that the list has been released, we see that they've actually made it a lot harder for us to ask for substitutions. So the only thing that we can ask them to add onto our yes list is what they consider everyday household items or smart devices, which are already on the no list. So, like, say if you need a Google Home or a smartwatch or an iPad and it's related through to your disability, you have to prove that that's going to reduce your support needs or make it cheaper to access supports.
Understood.
But what we were all told through the consultation is that would also include like services. So it only applies to assistive technology. So if there's something, say, that's on the no list, and if we could prove that that's likely to reduce our other support needs quite considerably, we were hoping that we'd be able to have some flexibility with the NDIS in saying, hey, we understand that generally this support is a no, but in our specific circumstance, it may be cheaper to access that support. Like in this case, say they've got massage listed on the no list clearly, and there's some people that may have, say, lymphedema or spasms or the like. If they're going to see a physiotherapist or an exercise physiologist to receive a treatment, like for, say, lymphatic massage or remedial massage to reduce spasms, which is a legitimate sort of request in helping a person to manage impacts of their disability, or it's a disability-related health support. Sometimes accessing like a masseuse or even someone that's trained in the community to deliver that support may actually be cheaper or more effective than having to fund an allied health professional to deliver it. So it's still very prescriptive, and there's a lot of concerns as well that some of the things on the no list may further sort of discriminate against some of our rights. Like if we look at, say, child protection as an example, child protection's placed on the no list, but they consider babysitting, nannying, and au pair work as a child protection responsibility. And I know of people that have, say, acquired a disability quite abruptly, and they're still even going through the rehab phase of navigating their, say, new disability, and they might have a young child at home, and they may have some family members that are helping out to look after their son or daughter, and there's only a limited amount of informal support that some people are able to offer. And even if we're looking at external child protection systems, and which aren't really appropriate to sometimes help out when we've got a disability and can sometimes be a little bit confronting to access, they may only be able to offer a little bit of education or a couple of hours of support a week, when that family may need help with someone to supervise that person's son or daughter doing an activity that we mightn't be able to do just due to our disability. It doesn't make us bad parents at all, or negligent, or warrant engagement with like a child protection service, which is sort of insinuating that we're putting a person or a young person at risk or danger. And that can sometimes make us feel like we're not like it's not promoting us to feel included in the community, and that we have a right to a family and to be a part of a family. and it's insinuating that we're not capable. And like I took it as a little bit of an affront myself when I saw that. And I know of people that with these changes could be at risk of having their children enter foster care or being removed from home because they're not able to get a little bit of extra help to manage the practical barriers of parenting associated with their disability. And they love their kids. So in this rush, I think people's stories have probably been missed a lot. And I'm quite concerned that there's consequences that may be yet to come.
What's them of not making the consequences the fines a bit bigger?
Well, the problem is that in terms of consequences to the government itself, that only really comes when like the next election comes around and it affects them at the vote. But like the consequences to us as a community, that can last a lifetime. And we've got very limited options for recourse, and our opportunity to take decisions through to the AAT, where there's external oversight to the NDIS, has been reduced with this new legislation. So it leaves us as a community in a very difficult position. We can record the impacts on our community, and I know that a number of advocates are working tirelessly at the moment to create methods to have us be able to share our stories and to make sure that, like, if there is an impact on our rights and our independence, that we have those stories captured and we can help to share them to bring some accountability if it's required in the future. But we're also committed to working with the Department of Social Services and the NDIA to help smooth out kinks where possible and get a good outcome for our community. Because in all of this, like, I know it might be like, feel like the NDIA is pushing a lot of these decisions on us. It's not exactly them. They're just forced into making this happen. It's the government that's made the decision. They're just forced into making it happen. So probably try not to take out the frustration directly at the person on the phone. You're better off giving Bill a call because it's
thank you for that, Mark.
It's
and hopefully great outcomes.
Yeah, and it's been a quite confrontational time for the disability community as a whole. I know that I've got a lot of respect for the other disability representative organisations and carer organisations out there that have been engaging with the NDIS and Department of Social Services and like speaking up for us and our rights and like sharing some of the concerns of our community. And we're hoping that over the coming months we actually get co-design rather than consultation. And I can see how these lists can sometimes make us feel like we've got to fit into a box, and it may minimize aspects of our story. But I think the strength of the disability community comes from our shared overcoming, and that we have a strength and a resilience that is linked through to some of the struggle that we've had. And through that shared struggle, I think that we've got a good chance to overcome any of this. And will stick around a lot longer than any list or legislation. And I know we can push back in the future.
Yeah, hopefully. Thank you, Mark. We'll now move on to the impact of trust and control. So, Mark, my question to you: how do these support lists fit within the broader conversations about the commodification of disability?
Well, it can. I know that when I'm looking at it, it sort of feels like a bit of a support menu. And I know sometimes when I'm going to a restaurant, there's it might, what's on the menu may not exactly match with what I want to eat or what's actually going on that day. And it's almost taking a little bit of a McDonald's approach to providing supports. And I'm not sure about you, but I know that I'm quite complex, and just trying to link a specific support to one particular aspect of my life, it can be very difficult for me to sort of separate what's related to one impairment or another, or to my disability. Like, I'm a whole person and I know what's affecting my life. Trying to boil that down through to one impairment's quite a challenge.
And what do you need? And what do you need to actually prove it? That's another thing.
And like, when it's looking at these processes, there's still a lot that we haven't had those processes shared with us. Like, we only sort of received the list just after Minister Shorten's announcement, and we received the list, I think, first through ABC, not through the NDIS. And I'm not sure how much involvement the states had in the list, but I know that it's very unclear what we're supposed to do when the NDIS isn't able to provide a support and the states aren't able to provide a support, though we've got a right to that support underneath the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with a Disability. And in many instances, people's lives can be at threat, or they may be facing homelessness. And it seems a bit of a slap in the face to me to think that someone, say, could have a $300,000 plan that's funded for SIL, but if that person's homeless, what is a support worker supposed to do? Provide support to that person while they're living under a bridge? Looking at the practicality of how we address some of these situations, we've sort of lost sight of common sense and practicality. And in doing so, I think we've lost a little bit of our humanity. And
Unfortunately,
if we're just looking at people's complexities and needs on the basis of how much funding that we've received, it doesn't gel well with us feeling like humans. I know that a lot of the anxiety that people have shared with me this week is just over knowing whether or not our essential needs will be covered, and whether we'll be safe, and whether, like, if things change or like our needs become more intensive, can we trust the NDIS to be able to respond to those needs quick enough? Or are we going to have to wait 6 months for them to approve a wheelchair repair? Or are we going to have to wait 6 months for them to approve extra supports to keep us out of hospital? Or in many instances, I know of other people with a disability that have been stuck in hospital for months on end, just waiting on housing or other things that are a practical essential of life.
Yeah, it's the stories I hear are quite upsetting.
I'm
Thank you for
hoping.
that, Mark.
I'm hoping
So,
it's not too triggering for us, but by sharing these stories, I'm hopeful that someone takes some of these examples to heart. And when you're talking to your local member of parliament, or whether it's state or federal, or you're talking to decision makers within the NDIS or the Department of Social Services, together we've got the power to change parts of this process, and we're coming up to a time where I feel we have the influence to do that. But as a community, I feel that we deserve the right to have our safety addressed, and to feel that we know that we've got certainty that in situations where we're experiencing crisis or neglect, or we're feeling that we're disempowered, that we've got options, just the same as others within our community that may not have a disability have.
Yeah, exactly, Mark. So we are talking about actual people with actual lives. It's very important that we take into account everybody.
Yep.
When it comes to the NDIS,
Like
everybody's life matters.
Exactly. And I don't think that we deserve, in like some instances, it can feel like we're put in the too hard basket, or that people, they're preparing, say, crisis management plans and the like for the majority, but we're often in the minority, and it can cause a lot of anxiety just sometimes looking at like what can happen in those unexpected situations and not knowing whether our needs will be met. Like if we can have security over housing. Yeah, like it's just the basics. If we know that, like, if we're experiencing a housing crisis, that there's at least crisis accommodation available to us. Yeah. If we're experiencing like if someone's experienced a mental health crisis, that there's options to turn to there in regards to support. When we're looking at like our basic safety needs, like administration of medication and like managing some of the overlap between the NDIS and state-based systems, rather than these two governments basically arguing over the cost of our lives, we need assurance that they're going to provide solutions to us first and meet our needs, and the cost is addressed secondary, because them trying to pass the buck between one another, it's actually costing the Australian public a lot more, and it's causing hospital wait times to extend. It's causing schools to have inadequate resources to manage some of our needs. It's causing other aspects of the community to experience challenges in service delivery because there's very limited specialised supports for us in those overlap instances, and government departments just really don't like to talk to one another, unfortunately.
Now thank you for that, Mark. Look, moving on, there seems to be a disconnect between what the government is offering and also what people with disability actually need. So, how should the government respond to ensure fair, unbiased support?
Well, I think it's really important that the government gets co-design right, and that it's not consultation, which is the government, they have a tendency to come up with the options that they'd like to see happen and to just say, hey, you okay with this? And then go ahead and do it anyway. Rather than having us embedded in the creation of the solution and have us share our experience of going through those processes to come up with the solution and have us own the solution rather than just be a box to tick before they go ahead and implement it. I know that there's a lot of sense within the disability community that we're feeling at the moment things are quite rushed, and that there's little concern for like how risk is managed in this situation and lack of certainty over how we can use our supports and services. And I know that if the tables were turned and a lot of the people that are involved with implementing this process, if they were experiencing it, I can guarantee they'd probably not be that happy themselves. It's almost like signing up for a insurance policy or a insurance program and not having a choice over what insurer that you go with, regardless, and having the policy changed with limited actual input. But in this instance, we do have the power to sort of engage over the next few months and to engage in the co-design process that the government's offered. And I know that the minister, as the transitional rules, because remember this list that's been released, it's only an interim list. We can still change it because the state governments have to. The state governments have to approve the actual list, which is due to be discussed about November this year. So if there's things that you're finding that aren't working in the list and you have better ideas, or you think that some things are unfair as a part of the list, reach out to your representative organisations and reach out to your members of parliament, and that's both state and federal, because both levels of government have a part to play in supporting our lives. And this is an interim list. It's not something we're stuck with over forever. We're in a bit of an awkward transitional period in the NDIS at the moment, and I'm hopeful that if the government works with us, we can come up with something that works for us. But we have to make our voices heard.
Exactly. It's for Mark. Well said.
Yeah.
We need to have our voices heard. Exactly.
Yep.
It all goes back down to nothing about us without us. So it's very important that we do get our voices out there.
Well,
so in terms of moving forward, yep.
Sorry.
Well, we're actually quite a large part of the community in terms of within Australia. It's found that it's about 20% of our population have a disability in some form or another.
Yeah.
So that's 1/5 of the. Well, if you factor in children, it's still probably a little bit more than 1/5 of the vote.
Usually, if the parents have a disability, the children get passed on.
Yep. So, we've got a significant portion of the vote in Australia, and everyone has a connection to a person with a disability at some place within their life. And if we talk to our friends and our family and share our stories and share how these things are impacting us, and they can see that we're real people and we're not a dollar figure or on a budget that the government's trying to push, and that we can push that we've got rights and we have real challenges and we deserve to have our human rights respected, that has real power. And
Yeah, I know.
it's more power than a corporation can buy or than
But
someone can
but
spin. We've got connections, we've got families,
yeah,
and we're parts of communities.
yeah.
And I think that's something that
What we need to do is get it into the school and get the education out there. There are disabilities. There are people with disabilities, and how to come across them.
yeah, well, like
And
it's
people will treat us different.
and well, I think though as well, like a lot of the narrative that's been pushed all throughout this sort of campaign to reform the NDIS is around fraud and the like challenges the NDIS associated with like misuse of funds and the like.
Yeah,
But there hasn't been a lot of conversation around the challenges that we have as a community
yeah,
in terms of like our relationship with how the NDIS is currently run,
yeah.
or the things that we often struggle to sort of
And
have our needs with.
the improvements that need to be made
Yeah,
in
like
the
so
NDIS.
because I know that if I go and talk to just about any participant, they can offer some suggestion in one form or another in terms of experiences that they've had with the NDIS or the relationship that they've got there. But often, as a community, we're quite creative in terms of coming up with solutions,
Yeah,
and we know what our needs are. And if we can have our base needs met and we can make sure that we've got the tools to be included in our community,
yeah,
it's amazing some of the outcomes I've seen that's came from like other people with a disability and like what we can actually contribute
but like
if we're given the chance.
some people, they've got technology and it gives them a voice.
Exactly. Like I'll share part of my story is that I was near going to medically retire about 4 years ago. So I was on the disability support pension. My disability is progressive and working in the mainstream space was becoming harder and harder because a lot of people like they try to meet my needs, but the flexibility wasn't quite there. I made the difficult decision to like start a business or start an organization and started off in my garage at that point in time. I had to actually fight to get the operational guidelines changed for employment support so that I could access help or someone to help me with physical based tasks outside of an ADE where it's actually legal for a person with a disability to be paid as low as $2.80 an hour in Australia. And having access to someone to help me a few hours a week, I think it was about 8 hours or so, or worked out roughly about $500. That support I got from someone to help me with practical based tasks to be more included in the community. I started working out of my garage and eventually I put a couple of contractors on and trained them to work with people in the way that I do and like helping to resolve problems and eventually outgrew that little office space and moved into a larger office. And then from there into a space in Yalla. And I've grown to employ now a team of about 20 people, and most of them have a disability or a family member with a disability. And we support other people with a disability. And I know that a lot of the people that I've given an opportunity would have struggled to find that opportunity in a mainstream environment. and I've been able to create what I wished existed for me when I was in that position. And if we're given an opportunity as a community to look after, to have a fair go and to create opportunities, more often than not, we're also passing that along to our community. I know that through that small investment of about $500 a week, last financial year, our organisation contributed, I think it was over $1.2 million to the local community. And myself, I only paid myself the same amount as what I would have received under the disability support pension.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So it's all about, like creating if you create the tools for a solution, you put those tools in the hands of people that understand the problem. Those are the principles of asset-based community development, rather than having people from the outside that don't understand our challenges making the solutions for us. Often they miss sometimes the small complexities associated with problems, and they end up creating solutions that for problems that may not exist or may not exactly match the issue that we were trying to have solved.
Yeah. Well, yeah. No, thank you very much for that, Mark. Just to wrap things up, do you have any final thoughts or any final advice you want to say to the audience?
Well, I'm really glad that I've had the opportunity to chat with you guys tonight and to those in the audience. And it's, I'm really hoping that we can see reform over the coming years in terms of increased access to justice and accountability, like for our community, and that we can at some point in the future see something in the line of a human rights bill come into effect. I'd love to go and see the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with a Disability fully reflected in Australian law. And the biggest shock that I've or realization that I've came to throughout this journey over the last 12 months and engaging with the political process to try and speak up for our community is that I'm surprised that our constitution, or the Australian Constitution, gives us very little protection in regards to freedom of speech and in terms of our actual human rights. And there's definitely room for improvement, and I'm looking forward to seeing a whole generation of advocates and other people within the disability community find their voice and hopefully see us able to work together to make a difference.
Yeah, for sure, Mark. David, John, do you have anything you want to add?
We need more conversations like this in the mainstream. Not just thinking that we're radical. We need to use our voices and our participate to get away from this welfare mentality and to have policies which would truly bring about the social model of disability.
Yeah, no, I,
Yep.
I, I tend to agree with you there, and there's some rays of hope in that over the recent days, mainstream media has started to pick up our stories a little bit. Yesterday, I got to do an interview with ABC. They've offered to do a follow-up interview next week. We're actually hoping to do a catch-up in Wollongong next Friday, hopefully. We're just hoping for the council to provide a venue, but there's hope, and I think that the community as a whole is pretty receptive to our stories and can relate to some degree to the challenges. I'll get in there and say I'm not an extremist or a radical like Shorten may have sort of proposed previously in the in terms of some of like our people within the community, but we're hoping to work with government to come up with solutions, and all we want to feel is included and
Exactly.
to be part of the
How
solution.
do we do that if
Exactly. It's what
we're gonna have to need people with disabilities to fill in a form?
I think to be included in that process, we have to be. They have to understand the impact of us not being heard.
Yeah.
And I think that whenever policies rush through or when something's pushed through quickly, often things can get missed.
They get missed out,
And
then they forget about
we're
things.
likely to see as like things impact people's lives over the next few months, people's stories start to develop. It's important rather than reclusing or feeling like you're alone during some
Yeah,
of these times, you reach out, talk to
yeah,
other people in the disability community, talk to other people in
yeah,
your local community. You're not alone. Like we might be spread out, but we've got more in common than we have in terms of differences in a lot of instances, and people band together. And I know that there's a lot of resilience in the disability community, and things might be a little bit scary at the moment, and there might be a little bit of unknown, but policy can change. And like I know that already I've seen a lot of collaboration between different departments and the like to try and find solutions. And even hearing from different people within the NDIA and NDIS that may not exactly be happy with how some of the changes have been implemented, or they may not actually know what it is that the government's trying to achieve with some of these changes. And there's a lot of people there that are actually on our side that want to help, but they may be held up with some of the red tape or the boxes that they have to tick. So reach out, even share with them some of the challenges you're having, but it's probably important to keep things respectful. I know it can be easy to get angry and lash out at times, but the more that you share your experience with people. And I know that that can take a lot of energy sometimes, and you can feel like things are a little bit hopeless. But I know that if we persevere and the resources are out there in the community, if we can connect the right people together, we can get solutions. It's just a matter of time and effort. And I know that we're nothing if not resourceful.
Exactly. Well said, Mark. As Mark, John, and David said, get yourself out there. Be leaders within your community.
Mm-hmm.
Make your voices be heard. But thank you very much, Mark, for being on the show. It's always a pleasure to have you and to talk about the NDIS reform and the changes to the support list.
I'm happy to help.
Yeah.
And
And if I ever need you, or you need to spread any news out there, you can always come back to us.
I'm happy to help. And thanks for having me tonight, guys.
It's always a
thanks for
pleasure.
coming.
You've been watching CripChat, your weekly podcast on everything disability. Just next week,
Yep.
as you talk about more things disability related. Goodbye for
Yep.
now.
Goodbye.